How has nobody taken advantage of the fact that you have a silhouette, you've got this dramatic music, you have to strike a pose? And so yes, Senor Pescado to my Spanish-speaking friends as well. And one more note, too. There is a documentary about me, and the filmmaker is desperately needing a dramatic ending. So if there's an assassin here tonight, and I am your target, please have the courtesy to wait until the end of the talk so it has the dramatic punch that I think the film could use. So thank you. So let's begin with a question. What is an artist? This is an artist. What qualifies an artist to make him or her a unique commentator when it comes to political ideas and cultural ideas? It's not a question that you're used to hearing because, generally speaking, artists are no longer included in the public debate about what we are as citizens and where we should be going. And that is a problem, and I'm going to explain to you why. How many people have ever had an itch? You can raise your hand. Looks like everybody has had an itch. Okay? Second part of that question is, how many of you have had an itch while you're in public that decorum prevents you from scratching? Everybody has, right? There's a number of techniques that you can use, you know. My favorite, perhaps, being is, now wait, where did I put those lottery tickets? But everybody has a method to cope with it. Okay? So the second part of that question is, if you are in a private space and you get that same itch, what do you do then? You scratch it. You immediately scratch it. There is never a moment when you do what you do in public, which is try to pretend that you don't have the itch. You attack it. You go straight for the itch, depending on your commitment. It's either with this or it's with this, but you acknowledge it and you take care of it. It's an irritant that you satisfy. You itch, you scratch, and the angels did sing, right? So, why is this significant? Let's think about where an artist does the majority of his or her work. They do it in private, right? So in this space that we've already established as being a place where you can actually be very honest and you can address irritants and things that bother you, let's expand the definition of what an itch is. Because I was talking about corporeal itches, right? There are cognitive itches. There are ideas that you share with your friends, you have personally inside of you, that you don't feel safe because of this decorum to bring out into the public square. There are historical examples of that. At one time, it was impolite and considered politically incorrect, actually, to engage with notions such as African Americans are not inferior. Women are not the lesser sex. Gays, lesbians, and transgender people are not moral degenerates. At one time, you could not paw at these itches in the public square because they were considered too crude. But luckily, there were artists, thinkers, outlaws, deviants, who were willing to go against decorum and what is polite. And as a result, as a society, we're considerably less itchy, and that is a very good thing. So, what I do as a political cartoonist and as an artist, one of the best vehicles, let's remind who I am. This is what an artist is. It's, can I have a grant so I can finish my art? Yes, we're just going to keep bringing it back to sort of like deep, deep, significant ideas with some of these images. So, I would argue that you need a technique to bring controversial ideas into the public square. What is perhaps the greatest delivery system, I would argue, traditionally has been jokes. Because jokes, you have to actually be a little bit of a bad boy or a bad girl. You have to step out of this straight and narrow. You have to consider alternatives. You have to embrace diversity in many ways, right? So there are these little excuses where, I'll just say it, permit you to scratch your ass in public just for a moment, right? So let's look at some of these jokes. And as Helen said at the beginning of the day, you may be offended by some of these things, or you may not. But pay attention to whether this inspires you to have an itch that you need to scratch, or it scratches an itch for you and you go, ah. The point is that these are ideas that are presented in art. These are not bayonets, these are pencils. So they are non-lethal. So they are safe to consider inside your mind and inside my mouth when I speak them. So stretching exercises. So let's just have a little fun with some of these. This is Jesus as a young man learning carpentry. This one, for you who can't, people can't read it in the back, this is Bert talking. People are so worried about what gay marriage will do to the community, and the irony is that they probably learned all about what a community is from me, and I've had a guy's hand up my ass for the last 40 years. This is great news. We just found out that Justice isn't really blind and that she's into rich white guys. This is the stairway to democracy and also the stairway to fascism. This is, before we throw a ton of money into constructing a tomb for the unknown finger, we should first determine if it's saying fuck you or we're number one. And of course, for the kids, we have fly creationism, which is, in the beginning, God made a whole lot of shit. And while we're operating at such a sort of sophisticated level, actually, it's not as great as it sounds. It's the only position she'll try. And this, of course, is Cupid afraid that his parents are starting to suspect that he's discovered masturbation. And since we're close to Easter, let's end with a big bang. Sorry, baby, not tonight. I got to rise up early tomorrow. Okay, so what have we learned? I love having that phrase, after images like that at a TED event. Now, what have we learned? That we made a mistake in booking Senor Pescado. So what we've learned is that there are two, really, when you think about it basically, there are two realities that we typically navigate in a day. There's your private self, where you can be yourself, and you can address irritants, and you can be honest about what is happening with you and how you interact with the world. And then there is your public self, where you're much more conservative and you're much less likely to voice your opinion and do something about it and engage the world in such a way that is positive and meaningful. So when you consider two realities, what does that do to the concept of truth? You can't have two realities and then have a consistent truth, right? So something's happening. And what I would propose, since I don't have that long, I could talk for hours on this, is that what we're doing is we're inventing a substitute reality, an imaginary reality, that we're conflating with real-life objects and people and situations, and making them the same thing when they're not. Okay? So to put this in a way that is very easy for everybody to engage with, we do it with our money every single day. Take, for instance, a penny, which I know I have a penny in here somewhere. I do. So if you consider the penny, it's a cent, right? It's both of those things. But let's break it down. You have the physicality of the penny. It has mass. It's a statement of fact. It's undeniable. You can touch it, and you can actually see it. But it is also a cent, which is the imaginary value of the penny, and we've conflated them to be the same thing. And so what that does is it creates a situation where you think that you are actually perceiving your imagination when you look at a penny. And that's problematic because you're seeing a fantasy, and that is that's a lie. And we do it also with words. We do it with words that turn into concepts. They don't have intrinsic value until they are labeled as such for you. For example, does anybody know what this is? Did somebody say something? Well, since I have the microphone and I am all-powerful, I will say what this is. This is the Sanskrit word for inner peace. Is it inner peace? No, it is not inner peace. It is a label that is used to represent inner peace. And if you don't have the ability to read this word, then it is absolutely meaningless. So therefore, it has no intrinsic value until one is imagined on it. If you consider a menu, the words on a menu are drastically different than what you receive when you order from a menu. Only one of those things you can taste, you can savor, and is nourishing, and the other is not. If you don't want to take my word for it, let's look at somebody who has more credibility than me, Flaubert. Has anybody heard of Flaubert? Human speech is like a cracked kettle on which we tap crude rhythms for bears to dance to while we long to make music that will melt the stars. So it's been going on for a long time, this recognition of the incongruity between what we think about something, the concept of reality, and the intrinsic experience of reality. Just to give you one more analogy, no matter how good the writing is, reading about a roller coaster ride is never going to compare to the actual experience of riding a roller coaster. Okay? We are speechless when we are riding a roller coaster. And that's the experience. It's not this. Right? They're different things. Whoever says yippee anyway when you're actually on a roller coaster, now that I think about it, I'm going to start doing that. And there are other examples too. You look at something like this. This is green. Everybody understands what green is. But it's because you understand, you know how to read this language. This is a label. This is the experience. So they are two different things. And sometimes as a cartoonist, it's my job to figure out what happens when you have these two conflated realities as they move along and then when they separate, right? Because sometimes when you're looking at a political cartoon or engaging in political conversation, particularly currently, it all starts to happen in here. It starts to become this, it's intellectualized hate. You're not feeling it here. So I try to create cartoons that acknowledge this conflation between imaginary reality and real reality, and then what happens when those two things separate. What can we learn? Where do we go? What resonates as truth for us? So consider this. We have murder. We have massacre. We have genocide. And then we have investment opportunities. Okay? So it's the same, it's the concept and it's the experience. It's the concept, and then it's the experience. And there's that difference. So then the question becomes, how do we devise a way of recognizing those differences between the intrinsic reality and the conceptual reality? Okay? Because when you're looking at a penny, going back to the penny analogy, a penny only has value to me because it has value to you. Right? If you didn't recognize the value of a cent, it would just be meaningless. And so what do we do? What are we doing to perpetuate this idea that our imaginations have credibility as reality? How does that get perpetuated? It gets perpetuated by creating narrow mythologies that everybody, or the majority, can agree is a viable truth that we should all abide by. And so when that happens, you end up with a very oversimplistic notion about what your responsibilities are in a society. You create ideas about us and them. You vilify people. You turn yourself into a hero. So there is a way to recognize how to separate these two things. At least I think so. And what that thing is empathy. Because you do not require empathy to recognize the value of assent. But you do require empathy to recognize the value of another human being, and even of yourself, or of the environment. And you can tell the difference. It's not a decision, it's an experience, and you know what is true and what is bullshit. So my job often, as a political cartoonist, is to avoid the left side of the aisle and the right side of the aisle and look for what makes us all human. It's finding this empathy. So I'm going to show a couple more images that, rather than blab and say this is this and this is that, none of them have gag lines, just see if there's something that resonates inside these images for you that provides a truth or an experience, or creates an itch or scratches an itch. And this is one that I will actually say a few words about, just to give context. This last summer, I was tasked with the job by TruthDig.com, who I often work for, to cover the Democratic National Convention here in the city. And the idea was that I would go and I would attend, and I would be a snarky political cartoonist and create really funny images about the circus that was happening in this town. I had every intention of doing that, but putting yourself into a situation and seeing other human beings around you changes your responsibility. You start to recognize the humanity. So I found myself at Dilworth Park, just outside of City Hall, which, if you've ever seen it in the summertime, the plaza is turned into interactive fountains, and children come and they play. Many inner city kids, that's their entire day, is just playing among these fountains. So I found myself focusing on these two boys. And they were brothers, and they were completely engaged in play. And it was precious. And it demonstrated a vulnerability that we all need to be reminded about. It was beautiful. What I didn't have in this image, other than the other children I pulled out, and the convention goers and protesters, off to the side, maybe by 15 feet, was a chapter of the Westboro Baptist Church. If you don't know who they are, they enjoy screaming through megaphones about how God hates fags, Muslims, Catholics, Jews, screaming. And what was meaningful and precious about this scene to me was this deep significance of this human activity, and that this is what is going to sustain us. It's not about figuring out the right way to play our politics. It's recognition of the human heart and recognition of the empathy that is the only thing that's going to give us cohesion as a species Start thinking about us as a species. So that's what I wanted to capture with that image. Because until we figure out the preciousness and the vulnerability of what we are just as beings, we're always going to be at risk from people who want to cheapen us into something else. So if there's nothing else that you leave with from me this afternoon, leave with this. Never recognize this as music. Don't trick yourself into seeing this and saying, it is music. Your literacy will tell you that you're looking at music. Because if this is music to you, and you accept this as the definition of music, you will miss the opportunity to sing. And you will miss the opportunity to hear other people sing. And if you do that, the great tragedy is, you miss the opportunity to dance. And if you miss the opportunity to dance, then you miss what it really, truly means to be speechless.